So I know this title of the talk was about like um, managing your mental health as a writer. And I just wanted to upfront say that there is no like single way that, not never mind that you manage your mental health. That's, unlimited ways, but also like even experience that we have and, common struggles as writers. There's certain things I think a lot of us can relate to. And I'm going to share the struggles that I've been through and what's helped me not overcome them, as we'll get to, but be able to have a healthier relationship with these things. And I hope that, there's some insights you all can take away. But, I can only speak to my experience and writers that I know. But I think writers are as diverse as the world. And there's so many different things that we have going on in our lives that influence our writing and influence our relationship with it. So I just wanted to say that if you see some of yourself in this talk, like I really hope you do. And there's also going to be an opportunity for us all to reflect together, but also know that everyone has their own unique story here. And I also hope this inspires you to begin sharing a little bit more about your own mental health and begin opening up those conversations between writers. I think writers are, compared to many communities online, we're pretty open with each other. We're pretty vulnerable, but at the same time, I think young writers, especially, like it is tough for us to even find each other, never mind have these conversations. So what being a writer is at times, it can feel a lot like this graph. And it is a meme. I think we've probably all seen it. I've seen this one before, which is why I went and found it again. And I'm like, we're starting here. And I think it's something that it depends on the day where you spend some of the pie in, because some days are like more internet surfing than they need to be. And that's probably more the pie. And then some other days, like maybe it's just crying and that's okay. But bottom line, like writing is not just like writing and locking yourself away in the woods. Like it's like kind of fun to imagine that. And I still have that fantasy of like being able to go to a log cabin and just write. And I can't really pinpoint much times in my life that's actually happened, but I still think I'm a writer. I am a writer, even though it's a little bit more messy than just sitting down and drafting a novel and pumping it out. It's not like that. But um, I, with that, wanted to mention my first keynote ever at Young Your Writers was about uh, being a writer, but not being confident in my identity, which is why I said, yep, I write kind of. I don't want to dive super deep into that one aspect of my, um, I'll call it a struggle, an obstacle that I faced in my own mental health as a writer, because I've already previously done that here and talked about how you can, come into your own voice and come into your own identity. But I will say, as an intro to myself, that I am a science fiction thriller author, and it's something that I have been doing for a long time, but wasn't open about for a long time. When I was 13 years old, I got very serious about writing dystopian books. I really found myself in a lot of the books that Veronica Roth or Suzanne Collins, or I mean, the list goes on of like all the incredible authors that have just written these worlds that I really found myself in as an angsty teen who's still angsty, but not a teen anymore. I just turned 20 recently, which feels weird to say, but um, you know, that when I was first writing, I didn't tell anyone about it. And I felt like I wasn't even really a writer. And I think growing up, and we're all at this stage of life where we're, writing's a part of our lives, but we don't necessarily even know what place we want it to have in our lives, or if we know what place we want it to have in our lives, and we want to do this for most of our lives. The question is, well, how? So it's very stressful. And I think as a kid, especially like growing up in high school, which I know some of you all here are in college, like it's not exactly a career that maybe all of our parents are like, woo, go for. My mom was always very supportive, but I wouldn't say like people around me talked about being a writer. So I didn't talk about myself being a writer. I didn't feel like I was a writer until an IND published my first book. And then I guess I was like, well, it's hard to say I'm not a writer at this point because I wrote this, but it was still difficult for me to really come into my own there. And it was that relationship and where it went that sent me down various spirals that has literally threaded my life, which is going to be what this talk is about. My relationship with writing, how that has gone into a million different directions, and it literally sent me across the world and back in literal and figurative senses, and why I'm here today sharing my insights. So before we get into my relationship and how that's evolved over time and how my awareness of it has evolved over time. I want to ask y'all a question. Oh, there we go. Switch the slide. What relationship do you have with writing? And I was like bouncing back and forth in my mind, like what we want to do here, because this is, I know I'm like talking, but it's also like a conversation. So we can do like one of two things. And I want it like whatever y'all are more comfortable with. So we can have everyone take like 2 or 3 minutes now, even maybe more than that, 5 minutes, and write a reflection, a paragraph, and then share it. Or we can go into breakout rooms of 2 or 3. I think we have like what, 15 people here ish. And we can all talk to each other about what our relationship is with writing. So I don't know if we do like a little poll. I'm like in my screen presenting mode, so it's hard for me to tell. Let me get out of screen presenting for this moment. And see, maybe we do like a little poll of like yes or no in the chat. Yes for self-reflection and then group, and no for like breakout room. I'm doing a live poll here. This is a experiment, so we'll see how people think about this. Okay, people are definitely going self-reflection. I was feeling that way as writers. I didn't want to like. I was firstly like, let's go into breakout rooms, but I didn't want to like force people there. In our only our first. Okay, some people are saying breakout room. Oh, we're. Uh, okay, I think. Oh, we're like split, y'all. This is actually so. Hmm. We're gonna do self-reflection. But because we're actually no, let me make sure I count that 2, 3, 4. Oh wait, actually, no, I think breakout rooms won. Yeah, because I saw yes and no, but that was just Desiree outlining it. So let's get breakout rooms together. That's exciting. Cool. So I'm going to create 3, and I'm going to assign everyone, including myself, automatically. Actually, I'll create 4 because that'll be an even number. So we'll be back in like 3-4 minutes. Talk about early with writing. I know it's scary meeting strangers, but we're all like super friendly here. I know plenty of y'all like personally and like love this group. So if you guys are, this is your first U conference, if this is your first conference at all as a writer, we're all very nice, and we all are maybe even have questions about our own relationship with writing, but we can chat about it for a few minutes. All right, breakout now. Let's do it. Open all rooms. I hope I did that right. Oop, Desiree's popping back in. Awesome. I think everyone is now. Cool. I think we are all back. Okay, great. I hope you all can hear me. I am sharing the slides again, I hope. That's the goal at least. Let me know if you can see the slide that says, what relationship do you have with writing? Like a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. So I wanted to ask everyone, maybe you could speak up, preferably, but if not, you could put it in the chat. What were some things that y'all chatted about in your group in terms of y'all's relationship with writing? I can share from the group I was in if anyone's shy, but I'd love to have people come up. There's no, we all probably have very similar relationships and senses.
Can I go?
Yeah, come. Yeah, I would love to hear.
Okay, so I was saying in my group that it helps with my self-awareness, and it helps me to like understand who I really am and what I really want, and also to express myself.
That's beautiful. That's very powerful. That's very powerful. I would agree. I feel that too. That's a really great reflection. Let's see the chat. Fan fiction being a starting point for a lot of us. Yeah, that's something for me as well that I started with too. And I didn't even know I was writing fan fiction at the time. I didn't know like it had a word, but it was instinctive to just find a story I like and create my own little version of it. It's so cool. Thank you everyone for doing this. And I hope that also as well, getting to meet and chat with like us fellow young writers opens up everyone to the next few days. And coming live, if you can make it, I think is a great thing because you'll be able to interact with everyone, and you can even like DM people in the Zoom chat. And just so anyone knows, like I and anyone else, like Desiree, no one who's hosting the meeting can see the Zoom DM chat. So be very nice to each other, but know that like it's like your private whispering conversation in class, and you can chat with people there. So I want to encourage that. But with that said, we will circle back to this conversation later, but mindful of 3 p.m., which is when my keynote ends. At least I think. You, Desiree, let me know if I'm wrong with that. I will continue on with the story that I like to share with y'all, which is a deep reflection on my own relationship with writing. And it's something that I hadn't explicitly thought about really much in my life before this like last year or so. And with me thinking about it, was probably a little bit too late. When I say a little bit too late, it came off the back of me being burnt out of writing and not writing for an entire year, um, which really took a toll on my soul, really. And it also preceded some chaotic moments of my own making in my life that came from this struggle and obstacles that I had in my own relationship with writing, this toxicity that built up, actually really creating like unhealthy moments in my life. So that's where we're getting to. But to begin with my relationship with writing, I know I have my gap year here. This is actually me in a bus. So this is like the cliffhanger that we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But to start with when I was young and how I kind of gravitated towards words and reading always. And I think it's something that a lot of us probably had. For me, reading was like what I did in my free time. It was just something I did like compulsively, and I loved it. I read one of the first like series I remember just like devouring and loving and like really getting wrapped up in the world was Rick Riordan's Lightning Thief and the Percy Jackson series. That was just very formative for me. And with these stories, I, like someone mentioned in the chat, I began writing my own kind of fan fictional stories similar to it. And as growing up, and I'm not gonna like tell you all my whole personal life story, but I do think there's merit in sharing a bit of my own pain and struggles just growing up. My parents got divorced pretty young when I was 7. And that was always something that I knew was up there. And I didn't really know the story. And this was an outlet that at the time I didn't consciously know I was using as an outlet, but it was totally for me a way to process the pain I had from that, the confusion. And when dystopia came around, like the young adult dystopian craze, like for me, it was literally like, oh my God, like I really understand what these characters are going through, because I also, at that age too, like right as I was becoming a teenager, was starting to have more of an awareness of like, well, there's climate change. These big tech companies, which were much less obvious at the time, but even back then I had an idea of like, what is like Facebook really doing? And what are all these big tech platforms? It felt dystopian, the world we were already living in. And my life in a way felt dystopian because I didn't really know why my family had to move across the country and why my parents had to get divorced. The very short story is that my dad is a sports gambler, which actually comes back in my own story, not sports gambling literally, but we'll get to it. So that for me, writing like held such an important place in my life. And when I found out between the ages of like 13 and 15, this whole story of my own past kind of came up to the surface. That's when I really dove into writing. And writing didn't become something, it wasn't like a choice anymore. It became something that I needed. And I started doing it every day, very intentionally. And I would come home from school and I would write, and I would write, and I would write. And I had no goal in mind. Like this wasn't like, I'm going to be an author. I wanted to be a scientist in my mind. Like being an author felt so unrealistic that like it wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind, right? But I was writing, and you know year and a half goes by doing this, and I actually had written a book, and then I'd written another book, and then eventually I was like, maybe I should release these out into the world. But this is one of my internal struggles with my own writing. I felt so I didn't feel my work was good enough that I never actually was really proud of it, even when it was out in the world. And that's something that came back to haunt me very shortly in this story. But at this time, writing became something that was my escape from life to my entire life. It became my identity. And all of a sudden, that kid who was too afraid to share he was a writer, this is all I could picture for myself, because this and my relationship with writing is what had gotten me through the hardest years of my life. So I didn't know how I could live without it. And I didn't know how I could live without being the center of my life. So I was determined to make a living as an author, which is not easy. But my mom, luckily, was supportive in the sense that she didn't tell me like, no, don't do it. She like wanted me to do it. But like, like, I mean, what does that mean? Like, my mom's not Stephen King. I mean, and Stephen King's son's definitely been helped by that, and all power to him. But in that, like, I'm lucky that my parents encouraged me to go down this path. But this path is dark and messy and confusing at times. And this talk is not about making a living as a writer at all. But I do hope that one question, as a little pause in the story, that everyone does reflect on is, what place do you want writing to have in your life? Because for me at that time, it was unwavering in that it had to be, I wake up, this is what I do. But there's so many other ways to have writing as part of your life. It can be something you just do for yourself. You don't need to release your writing out into the world ever. And obviously, if you release it out into the world and have readers, I guess you're commodifying your writing and it's becoming a business, which there's dark sides and upsides to that. The upside might be that you get more time writing. The dark side is, well, you're commodifying something so core to your own self, which we'll get into that mental health struggle, because I think a lot of us down the line may end up wanting to release our books out to the world and commodifying them in a sense, because we live in a capitalist society. And that's the systems of publishing right now. Whether you go traditional publishing or indie publishing, all of it's based off of a market and sales. Nothing's inherently wrong with that, but it is not, it does suck the soul out of art, right? And it complicates that relationship with writing even more. So this is all things that I was going into it blindly. Like, I didn't know this, but I just wanted to do it. And I just knew if I have to do it, I have to somehow feed myself. The very, at the time, I'd say like more naive, but also like honest, pure intention to just want to do what you love. But I will say there's other ways to like truly be a writer, meaning like you are a writer if you even write an hour a month, if you write even an hour a year. Like, if this is a passion of yours, you are a writer. So don't think like you have to clock in hours, and never think that writing has to be something that has to be tied to an income, and that you aren't a writer unless you make a living or an income stream from this. No. That's not how it works. And you can be involved in the writing space in so many different ways. So you can do this part-time after work. Yeah, it's a lot sometimes. It's a lot of work, but if you really want to take it seriously and like, I want to write an hour a day, I want to write 2 hours a day, you can do it. It's possible. It's possible to have that relationship with writing, but you might have to have a different relationship with other things in your life. So I'm going on this little tangent just to say that, you could go into academia and be a professor who's teaching children creative writing, and teaching young people creative writing, and teaching people of all ages creative writing. And I think that's something beautiful too. And there's a million other different paths. You can be an editor, you can be an agent, you can be, the list goes on, right? So if you love writing, you love storytelling, like, you have to figure out, like, do you want to do this, or do you want to do this and something else? Do you want to have this be another part of your life? That's a decision that's very personal and will probably evolve over your life. It doesn't have to stay constant at all. And I do think that many of us here at some point or another of our lives will want to have that dream of having readers, having other people touched by our stories, and being able to build that community and focus really on creating amazing stories, having that space, which probably means doing it full time, which, if that is a desire that you've ever had, I'm now going to share you my story of what went wrong internally during that process, because that's a story I can really relate to. Anyone with that desire, because it's something that's all I wanted. And to show you that's all I wanted, I actually graduated high school a year early. I took classes ahead of time, and I had no intention. I didn't apply to any college. I'm like, all I want to do is write books. So I took a gap year. I didn't live in a bus on that gap year. We're going to get to how the bus comes in. It's a little, the story takes a interesting turn. But during my gap year, I was caught in the indie model of publishing. And there is no right or wrong way to publish your work, just know the fundamental market dynamics, the fact that you have to commodify your work if you want to make a living at it, is at the core of it. And currently how our systems work is either an agent will take on your work and sell it to an editor, and that editor then is going to acquire it for a price, and that price is based off what they think it can sell. And then your book is edited, it's packaged and sent out for distribution and marketed to sell, to hopefully generate a positive return for that publisher. And if it doesn't, you won't get published again, most likely. And if it does, you probably have a career going, but except you're probably not making a full-time living yet. So you have to basically juggle 2 jobs until hopefully one day you can get that up. The other side, and it's equally challenging. And I'm just being realistic in the sense of what I've talked to a lot of writers. Like, there are people who hit it big and make it, and that's amazing. But for a lot of people, it's a longer grind, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. On the indie side of things, you're outlaying your own costs for your work. You're selling in a mainly digital format, typically, and you're running your own inbound for your books, in the sense that you're either paying for marketing, doing digital outreach, so contacting influencers, people online who read a lot and can touch their fans, or maybe posting on a site that will never be for free, but a place like Wattpad, Royal Road, etc., that can generate you free inbound for your book, that hopefully down the line you can convert to people who are paying you to read your stories. So that is a really complicated, the market of the books, the market of fiction. And it's a market that has evolved and it will continue to evolve. And it's something that I personally believe doesn't really work well for writers either way right now. And it's sad, but I also think that will change too. And that we are moving towards a better world for writers. And that I believe it's also better today than it was 50 years ago. So that is like my optimism, but also knowing that like none of it's easy, all of it's confusing. And a lot of it, all of that mess, none of it actually has to do with doing what you love, which is creating a story and having someone else connect with it that can take that same meaning, have a similar relationship that you did with your characters, that you did with your world, that made your life better. And that is the power of story. It's why it's so awesome. But it's unfortunate that, again, like story never exists in a vacuum, right? It exists in this complicated, messy world. And for me, I chose the indie publishing path. And that meant me working a job full-time to invest into publishing these books. And at the time, there was this publishing model that was kind of heralded, which was basically write fast, publish fast, and like, try and build an audience. And for me, I had the pressure of wanting to try and like build this in like basically a year, a gap year, which was nuts. So I ended up writing 9 books that year, which is a horrible idea, because it's just, yes, like you could write 9 good stories in a year. Dean Koontz did it for about 10 years when he was getting his career started. But you literally are writing 40 to 50 hours a week of actually writing. So like that was my year. I didn't do anything but that and work. And when I got to the end of the year, I hadn't hit my goal. And my goal, being very upfront, was me as being a good writer. And I told you a little while ago that I didn't actually think I was a good writer. I didn't actually believe that. It was something I really struggled with. I was insecure with my own work. Yet my work, I had such a close relationship with, that it was basically like a piece of me. It maybe wasn't even a piece of me, it was me, which maybe says something, right? I didn't feel good about me at my core, but I believed that getting these sales would help make me feel better. But it didn't happen. And of course it didn't, because one thing to note in this industry is it's way simpler than people like to make it out to be. If you write a great story that connects with people, that's it. It'll happen in time. It might take 30 years, but it's a long game of, you're not going to make a living off of one book or these are rare anomalies that we study in class. Like the people who've done this and built readerships and have people coming back to them, it's a community they're building. and there's no market there. That doesn't have nothing to do with it. It's just about a connection to another person. So that's the beauty of it. That story really has power and can move around this world and can connect with people extant to any of these complicated market forces that we do have to deal with at times. But if you're trying to like make a living by 22 and make it all happen and putting that pressure on yourself on a timeline that doesn't make a ton of sense, then you end up in a position where if you're like me and you put your self-worth in that, you're going to feel really, really not great about yourself. So there's a twist in this story that is interesting, and it's made my life way weirder, but also better than I could have imagined. But in the middle of all this, my mom wanted me to go to college, of course. So she had me apply to college. And I honestly, like, there's no secret to it. I got lucky and I got into Harvard. And in the middle of this all, the gap year ended, and I thought the stakes would be my life's over. Like, what am I going to do? I applied to college, but in reality, I was now going to school, and I was going to a good school that gave me a whole new window of opportunity. But I'll tell you what it didn't do. It didn't help me sell my books, and it didn't help me feel any better as a writer. And I went during the year, I'm a sophomore now. So I was a freshman during COVID. So I got here on campus. And right when I got here, it was starting to click to me that like I didn't hit that goal. I feel really bad about myself as a writer. But I had this plan to make up for it, this plan to sell more books, and it was to do YouTube. And I started uploading videos to YouTube of my days at school. And my days at school, for the record, were horribly boring because I would just sit in my dorm room, horribly boring. And I like kind of released my videos just literally having very little expectation, because my videos weren't something that I thought was like my heart. Like, my heart was in my stories. So that's where I put my self-worth. But I will say, in our current digital age, and we all know this, we've had tech gamify creation, gamify what it is to be a storyteller, to the point that we've actually taken the meaning out of art. And art without meaning, art that is literally 15 seconds, can sometimes do a lot better from a number standpoint than something that I spent thousands of hours on, building a series, my whole heart into it, something that is objectively, in my opinion, more meaningful and contributes more emotional value. But the market doesn't care, right? So the market, YouTube, said, we're going to pump your videos out. I had no idea, right? Just the algorithm. I don't need to like get into the nuances of YouTube, but there's a lot of similarities between content creation from a video standpoint and writing standpoint. And the similarities I don't like, they scare me. But well, okay, from a storytelling perspective, I like it. From the actual market of it, it's like, it's scary. And when my YouTube video started to do well, I literally had a crisis. I had an identity crisis, because I'm like, you're telling me for years, I sat here. Literally at this point, I had been writing seriously for 5 years. I had been publishing for 3 years. I had poured my heart and soul into this, and I couldn't get anything to work in the market, right? Work in the market, key. But YouTube was doing that overnight. And I tied my self-worth to these numbers. And again, how we do these things online, especially, and we all deal with this in a digital platform sense of, let me post something on Instagram. Every writer interacts with digital platforms. Let me get likes, right? It is a dopamine rush. So I had a great dopamine rush, this great high of like, oh my God. But then internally, I'm like, what is this? I'm like, why did this happen? Why couldn't this happen to my books? And the conclusion I came up with is, I'm a horrible writer. I am god awful. If these YouTube videos I can look at in like a minute and be like, this is objectively like not that interesting. Yet this is, again, me being hard on myself, because there's no objectivity in art. But I was just like, oh my God, like I must really be terrible at this whole writing thing. So I gave it up. I was burnt out over the year. I gave up on ever being a writer after all of that. And I went all in on being a YouTuber. Something that, well, that's where the bus comes in. So I, in the middle of all of this, again, was still attached to the numbers, right? I needed to be validated as like being good at what I was doing, because what I was doing was who I am. I wanted to feel good about myself. We all want to feel that belonging and connection, right? We all do. It's like the fundamental human need. It's what story gives us. But I felt my stories were out in the darkness and were alone. So I'm here creating these stories where I'm now turning my life into a movie. So I thought it was entertaining if me and my friend went and bought a bus and traveled through the country on a road trip that took us to 30 or 40 states, and it was insane, like a new adventure every day. And the details I'll spare you, because then we'll just really get into the weeds. But know that I, at one moment, crashed the car after being in a snowstorm for 24 hours because I thought that was a good YouTube video. I crashed the car in an accident. I fell asleep because I was so exhausted and like actually physically finished. And in that moment, instead of like taking a step back and being like, I have a problem, I thought, I'll never go that far again. But what does that really mean? I'll never go that far again. And taking this back to the fiction context, maybe it's for you. I see this book is doing really well. So maybe I'll never copy, like literally copy a trope in a book again and try and catch a market while it's hot. I know writers do it all the time. Doesn't matter where you are at in the market, meaning indie or trad, writers do this all the time. You know, I went to a really ridiculous extreme, but it took me another 2 months because again, I was in this addictive cycle of being a creative. My relationship to writing had went to, I love you, I need you in my life, to you're my monster, you're my enemy, and you're above me now. And you're dictating my life to the point that I am truly an addict, not unlike my father was an addict. Very similar thing, because in writing as well, one thing to remember is in an enlightenment world, not to get too crazy here, but in an enlightenment world, post, you know, post religion having this really grip hold on meaning making in society, science has had that meaning making, numbers have had that meaning making, logic has had that meaning making. Therefore, we think that we can just numericize everything, that we can get some quants and some economists in a room and can plan out the entire future of the world, that we can just move some money around, bebop, boot it up, we solve the world problems, crisis ended. Literally, Elon Musk says stuff like this on Twitter, when like the world does not work like that. Like the Enlightenment was some guys in a corner, science does cool things, but it is just numbers at the end of the day. And there's something deeper about being human, and it has to do with this soul. It has to do with writing, and writing is meaning making, and story is that, right? You can story tell in video as well, and we have lost that. Like we are losing that as a collective generation, and we are some of the people here who can help save that. So that's my call to action of why this is all important, right? Why this is so much bigger than even just our relationship with writing. This is our generation. This is our world's relationship with story, and losing that script. And I had lost it in this moment. And I'd lost myself in the process too, because I had lost what made me me. I had lost what made me human. I was turning myself into this number algorithm who wanted the next thing, who wanted the next race. But it's gambling, because in this storytelling world, maybe in stocks, you can, invest in here and get a return. It doesn't work like that in storytelling. It does not work like that. The most random things sometimes capture generations, and it's beautiful because the human mind, we can't numericize and predict like that. This deep human soul that connecting with sometimes just happens. And if you're trying to tie yourself to the output of that, the output of your creation, man, you're in for a rough ride. And this is what happened to me. 2 months after that one low point, I finally realized maybe we should stop like filming these crazy videos, which really just was like key for like, I'm actually exhausted. My body like can't do this anymore, which was good. Had to stop this. And if you're wondering, at this time, I literally had stopped going to school too. Like I was actually in that place where I couldn't focus on my schoolwork. So summer comes around, and finally I woke up in not a great moment in my life, but my grandmother died, and I went home and finally kind of like woke up to like, what have I done with my life? Like I haven't even like woken up to smell the roses of like, you go to college, man. Like, I was so stuck in this addictive cycle of what storytelling became for me. And this was literally me up until that point. This girl in the burning house, like this was my life. And I'm like, we're good. It's okay. We're fine. Right. But the big thing here, right, is 3 things that I dealt with. I tied my self-worth to external validation, which we all do to a certain extent. I didn't focus on grounding myself and taking a step back. And I got caught into spirals of pressure where the stakes were high. I was feeling bad at myself. Maybe it's, I didn't write that day. I didn't hit my word count goal. You suck as a writer. You're not good enough. You're never going to make it. And then that next day, you feel so defeated that you can't even get up and doing it. But then finally you pull yourself together. Okay, we're back to normal again, but then you don't hit that goal. And again, it's this cycle of just beating yourself up where like you're not really you're not really looking at the bigger picture, which is like internally your house is on fire and you have to put that out first. So yes, this is an actual picture, actual thumbnail that I filmed at one point for a completely different video, but I felt it was fitting to include here because like this is like me realizing like in a really like almost like psychotic state, like we need to change things, right? And this is what I described as my quarter life crisis, but problematizing this gets away from really the root of this, because this idea of like, oh, well, I got past the obstacle, right? Like I'm aware of this now. We're done. Like I now won't ever feel external validation anymore because I'm aware of it and I know it's not a good thing. It's not how like it actually works. It will be a circle that I will reconfront and reface in different ways at different times throughout all of my life, these same three problems. Because for me, an awareness of my mind, this is the struggles and obstacles that I gravitate towards facing. But it's not like a dragon that we can ever slay. Like we come back to this dragon. It's a never-ending series, right? And that's like my biggest takeaway. It's that this relationship that you have with writing is ever evolving, it's ever there, and you're never just gonna have it be perfect, because your relationship with life will never be perfect. And I'll get to that in the end. And I promise I'm getting close to the end of this talk, and there'll be a few minutes for questions for sure. But you're probably asking like, oh my God, it's like really chaotic. What happened like after? Because please tell me you're not like, actively, in this state again today, which for the record, if I was, I think there's nothing wrong with that because life, we like to think is linear in terms of time, but really time tends to go in wheels. That's it's more of a Central American, belief of that, but I really ascribe to it as well. But I took a step back, went back to school, started writing again, and very slowly over the process of months, literally almost half a year, I began integrating daily meditations to my life, what I call meta reflections, which are me taking a big step back, writing for like an hour about how I'm feeling, what's going on in my life, how I feel about the direction my life's taking, my relationship with different things in my life. Big reflections that I just do as checkups. I joined writers groups, something I was afraid to do because I didn't think I was good enough to even be around other writers, but I joined multiple writers groups and that's been really great for me. I've gone to therapy, which has worked for me as well. And I've also taken breaks and taking more care of myself, which has really meant taking the pressure off, because the stories exist forever. They're the world's oldest form of communication between humans, except for maybe like more, I don't like the word primitive in most contexts, but I'll use the word primitive here of like, literally like we didn't just start talking in stories overnight, but once that happened, we've never stopped. And this is what's worked for me. And I think there's a lot of habits in here that we can all take, because at the end of the day, the truth about writing is that it's a reflection of our relationships with ourselves and the world. And there's nothing more beautiful than that. I was recently at a conference, AWP, which many of you may know, Association of Writers and Writers Program, something like that. It's a really big conference though, and it was really fun. And someone up on stage said, the beautiful part of being a writer is like writing they teach us in school is about like, structure and grammar, and not that none of that's important, but really it's about meaning making, right? And we're never going to have a perfect relationship with any of these things ever, right? The struggle, what I titled this is mental health, which is, it's even deeper than that, is like, it's our soul's relationship to all of this. And I'm saying this soul in a very context of just, not a Christian sense or religious sense, just this deeper part of human nature. It'll never be completely perfect, right? Our stories will never be completely perfect, but that's okay. And I think as writers, we have to embrace it for all the imperfections, all the messiness and the pain and the joy too, because there's a lot of joy in it for us all. And yeah, that's my journey and what I've struggled with in my relationship with writing. And as you can see, it evolved a lot now. And I'm in a place right now with my life where writing is a piece of my life that is always there. It's a place that I process and reflect what's going on in my life. But my self-worth I am in this moment really trying to ground outside of my writing purely and even mostly. And I'm also searching for ways to, validate within myself. So I'm not searching for, external validation in a number sense. And if I'm searching for validation anywhere, it's in a group of fellow writers who can help ground me when I'm struggling with these sorts of things. Will I reach a point in my life where I spiral again and have a similar crisis? I call this quarter life crisis. Totally possible. But I do think that going through this has equipped me to better handle whatever challenges and however these things resurface. And I hope that it could help you too. So yeah, that's it for me. And in the little time that we have left, I think we have 8-ish minutes. We can round it up to, yeah, eight minutes or so. I'd love to take any questions from anyone. If anyone wants to share their story and yeah, anything like that, I'm an open book. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a question on topic about this too. Like if there's just something that like you want to ask me or ask a group of writers, go for it. We're here. So yeah, that's it. I'll stop sharing.
You can put questions in the chat as well.
Yes, don't be shy with it at all. My favorite part of the writing process, I would say I really like the world building and ideation, of course, because I'm a science fiction writer, so that's definitely like a big piece of it. But I love a moment when I would say probably like the 70% of the way through the book moment where like you're through like the middle where like you're contemplating like, oh my God, am I going to finish this? Because it's really hard right now. But like your characters are like really coming to life in your mind. This is in the first draft stage specifically. And they surprise you and you're like feeling what they're going through at such a high level because the stakes at that moment are at their peak. So for me, I love that moment where I am like, the story has gripped me and I feel like the story is the story that I'm not just writing anymore. Like something else is writing it. Maybe my characters took control of me in writing it. I like when there's that relationship in it, but it takes a little bit. It's not like the whole book's like that. It's only like these spurts and I'm like, oh yes, we got it. So thank you for that, Damien. And Sophie says, where do you write or how do you create writing space? Great question. So I would say that don't numericize your goals in terms of word count, but do try and block out time because time is finite and it's nice to try and block out time, but also know that like you might not actually be writing during that time every day and don't be super hard on yourself for it. But as teens, especially as college students, we tend to overpack our schedules, do a million clubs, a million things. I understand that, but I actually think it's important if writing is important to you to make space for that and block it out in your week as if it's a class. Like odds are you show up to class, you do your homework. Maybe every day it isn't perfect. Some nights you might oversleep. That's all good. You're not going to fail your class because of that. So likewise, don't internally fail your own idea of what being a writer is if you're not always there. But I would create a time for you to show up. For me, that place that I show up is usually my desk in my dorm room where I'm at right now. And that time varies, but tends to be 3 blocks a week. So 2 to 3 hour blocks 3 times a week, once on the weekend, once on Thursday night, once on Tuesday night. But that's completely arbitrary because that's my schedule and it'll change next semester as my classes change. All right, so I'm actually going to take Renata because you have your hand raised, and then I'll get to the rest of the questions. We'll do rapid fire.
So one of the things you talked about was almost kind of having an imposter syndrome when it comes to like calling yourself a writer. So like what piece of advice would you give to people dealing with that similar imposter syndrome?
One, everyone feels it, no matter where they're at in life, right? Because we're always comparing ourselves to others and being like, we're not where they're at yet. So therefore we're an imposter. And my advice—
I'm not good enough to have imposter syndrome. What are you talking about?
well, but that's also it too, right? That's almost a form of imposter syndrome. You can't even classify yourself as a writer yet to have that, stereotypical creative struggle. But I would say my biggest piece of advice, if you are feeling imposter syndrome, take a step back and focus on the process and that core relationship that grounds you to really loving to write, and do it, and do it. And when it comes to putting your work out in the world, it's something that you have to be around a group of writers who are first initially reading it, or I would say writers too, because family doesn't give you that perspective of maybe knowing the relationship and the commonalities you face. And also they might just be like super, super nice to you. So you feel like, you almost feel like, okay, but it's my family. So, you could write it off. But if you go to a group of writers and literally like you're in one right now, and we also have a writers group as part of Younger Writers. And this is not like blindly promoting Younger Writers. Like there's other writers groups too. But I think that's a place to go and begin to be like, oh wait, like we're all here. Like, not only am I not an imposter here, but like they actually maybe read a chapter of my book and like it. Therefore, like, I'm not the worst writer in the world. I actually deserve to have people read my stories. Okay. If anyone else wants to share a question, drop in. Otherwise, I'm going to like rapid fire the chat. So what is your personal step-by-step process when writing a book? For me, that's like a long question, but I like it a lot. I think a great book to read is The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. A lot of my steps are close to this, but essentially the core thing is thinking about how will your character change? How will you show that, and why? Like, why are they changing? Why does the audience care? That to me is like all I really think about when writing a story. And then the world around it can make it more interesting. But like once I think about that, I plot it out step by step of like how they're going to change. And then I write it, but ultimately it ends up veering from that. That's like my stupid, simple process. It's way more complicated than that. But that's like as simple as it gets. And that's really the core of it. I don't know. Blocking out time, if you don't have time, that's great. Like if you don't have like for a period of time, you could do like a word count. There's no right or wrong answer. I just think sometimes numericizing things can become unhealthy because you can force out extra words that need to be. But for you, if that works, I think that's great, especially if you're doing it in like little bursts in your phone, like maybe in your notes app, or you pull up Google Docs or something like that. I understand that completely. And I think that's also a great strategy. Does anyone have any questions they want to share? Like audibly speaking, or any more in the chat?
Oh,
Awesome.
I see Anita's hand.
Yeah, Anita, what's up?
How do you like balance writing being personal and like having the world read your writing? Like, does it ever make you feel less secure when you write, and make it feel like less of a safe place?
For me, I really believe in the power of story to affect and really provide belonging to others. So I actually like want to bring people into my safe space. So I kind of view it as I found connection and belonging in this story. I've been able to make meaning of my own life and this complicated, complex world through me creating this world. And if I share other people with it, like maybe they can find some of that meaning too. And if they can scrape some of that and feel some of that, like to me, that's actually the beauty in it is being able to create a safe space that others can be a part of.
I just want everyone real quick, if they don't mind, can we unmute and just thank Michael and give a round of applause, please?
Oh.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Michael. It was really
Michael.
insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope
If you guys,
but thank you everyone. I really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, I hope really like you guys like can really see what I've struggled with my story. And I think we all face some of it. And it also is something that like that vulnerability too. Don't be afraid to have conversations like this with your friends, with your fellow writers. That's my call to action.